In recent days, events have begun unfolding in the Pacific that increasingly resemble not random incidents, but a carefully rehearsed scenario of pressure and power projection. Several respected outlets, including the Financial Times, Nikkei Asia, and even sources close to the administration, have reported unusual activity. Chinese warships allegedly blocked the passage of American cargo vessels. This involves not only container ships carrying industrial goods, but also strategic supplies, including petrochemicals and agricultural products, bound for Japan and South Korea, through areas where the Chinese naval presence grows stronger with each passing month. At first glance, this may seem like mere provocation, a show of force, but according to analysts at the Rand Corporation and the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, it represents a far more serious signal. China appears to be testing the waters, probing the limits of U.S. patience and the White House's willingness to respond. The question is how to respond. Donald Trump, who has always prided himself on the image of a tough leader, has this time, according to sources close to the White House, chosen a surprising tactic: no public reaction at all. Those around the president explain this by pointing to ongoing final-stage negotiations over a new tariff deal, with Trump unwilling to antagonize Beijing and risk derailing economic agreements. However, as noted by Wall Street Journal commentators, such behavior looks more like a display of weakness. For America's allies, it is an alarming signal. If China can stop American ships without consequences, then the balance of power in the region is indeed shifting. Meanwhile, China is rapidly expanding its navy. According to the defense journal Jane's Defense Weekly, in the past decade, Beijing has commissioned more warships than all NATO countries combined. This includes not only destroyers and corvettes, but also full-scale aircraft carrier programs. Where once U.S. carriers were seen as the unquestioned guarantee of American maritime dominance, the situation is now changing. The Chinese carrier Shandong has completed a series of combat drills in the South China Sea, while the new giant Fujian is preparing for full deployment into the ocean. American experts note that China is betting on numerical superiority and mass production. Dozens of Type 055 destroyers, equipped with powerful air defense systems, already today pose a threat to U.S. carrier strike groups. The U.S. Navy, by contrast, is facing serious challenges. Aging Ticonderoga-class cruisers are being retired, while new programs like the Zumwalt destroyers are faltering, plagued by high costs and limited effectiveness. U.S. naval aviation also needs modernization, but amid budget cuts and ongoing domestic crises, the pace of fleet renewal remains insufficient. The advantage the U.S. once had in the Pacific in the early 2000s is gradually fading, observes a military analyst in the Washington Post. All these factors intersect with the escalation of the tariff war. As sources in Beijing emphasize, China is using its navy not merely for military showmanship, but as a bargaining chip in negotiations. In Washington, there is growing recognition that such actions amount to a form of maritime diplomacy. China is signaling that if the U.S. acts too aggressively in economic matters, Beijing is ready to respond with force at sea, blocking key trade routes. And this impacts not only Americans but also allies such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. Interestingly, in China itself, these events are being covered with maximum openness. The state news agency Xinhua publishes reports in which Chinese captains detain suspicious vessels that intruded into Chinese waters. In international law, this is interpreted as a violation of freedom of navigation. But within China, the narrative is different. We are defending our interests. We are not afraid of American pressure. This shapes public opinion and lays the groundwork for such confrontations to become routine. Analysts point out that Beijing's strategy may be designed for long-term effect. China is not aiming for direct war. On the contrary, it is provoking the U.S. into making a mistake, into taking a sharp step that could later serve as justification for further pressure. Meanwhile, as Trump remains silent and pretends that nothing is happening, Beijing is winning both the informational and diplomatic space. Sources within NATO admit, if tomorrow an American cargo vessel is actually turned around by a Chinese destroyer and Washington does not respond, it will send a signal to the entire world that U.S. leadership is in question. Against this backdrop, the issue of Taiwan is increasingly coming to the fore. Intelligence reports indicate that China is using these provocations at sea as training, as a way to test reactions. If the US is not ready to respond firmly to the blocking of its own cargo ships, can it really defend Taiwan? That is the question now being raised in Tokyo, Manila, and even Canberra. And while Washington shows restraint, China strengthens its positions, step by step undermining what until recently was called America's global leadership. All this makes the situation extremely dangerous. One wrong move, a single incident in the Pacific, could trigger a much larger crisis. The economic confrontation has already escalated to a new level. It is now gradually turning into a geopolitical chess match, where China plays with growing confidence while the US is forced into a defensive posture. The reaction of US allies to what is happening in the Pacific has been highly ambivalent. In Tokyo, concerns are openly voiced. Japanese analysts on NHK have already stated that the American security umbrella may turn out to be paper-thin. According to Kyodo News, the Japanese Prime Minister has demanded assurances from Washington in closed meetings that, in the event of an actual blockade of trade routes between Japan and the US, the American Navy would be ready to act immediately. Yet, as Asahi Shimbun notes, such assurances remain only at the level of diplomatic wording. In Australia, the situation is no less tense. Canberra, traditionally reliant on its alliance with the US, is now being forced to reconsider its own military spending. The Sydney Morning Herald, citing sources in the Australian Ministry of Defence, reported that next year's budget may see an increase in funding for submarines and anti-ship missiles. Australians fully understand that if the US loses real maritime superiority, China could gain the ability to control not only the South China Sea, but also the exits to key routes in the Indian Ocean. Perhaps the most striking element, however, is the information war. Chinese media have launched a massive campaign in which every incident involving American ships is presented as proof that the US is no longer the master of the oceans. China Central Television has aired an entire series of reports under the slogan, "The sea belongs to Asia, not America." These segments show Chinese destroyers sailing alongside American vessels, accompanied by commentary from military experts claiming that America is afraid of direct confrontation. On Chinese social media, hashtags about US weakness are racking up millions of views. According to surveys by the Global Times, young people are increasingly voicing support for a tougher stance against Washington. Thus, the situation goes far beyond naval maneuvers. It has already become a comprehensive strategy: military provocations, informational influence on the population, and pressure on US allies. China is playing simultaneously on three fronts: military, diplomatic, and informational. And as long as the White House remains silent, the prevailing view in the region is that the balance of power is irreversibly shifting, and America can no longer guarantee the same level of protection as before.